You know, as the deadline looms for Congress to agree on that budget, the political rhetoric is at an all-time high. Both sides digging into their positions, and both seem willing to let a shutdown happen, at least temporarily. Joe Krier, president of Krier Wealth Management, here to discuss the key elements of what we're talking about and what all of this boils down to. You know, we're talking our post office is going to close, and the answer is no to that. Social Security checks will still go out. Right. What is going, who and what's going to be affected by the shutdown? Yeah,
well, you know, the way they define it, and it's actually 40 hours from right now as we speak that it'll shut down, is everything that's not essential. So, you know, it's government employees, checks will be delayed is the big thing. And if it happened to drag on, which we don't think it will, then money starts to grind to a halt that's being funded for unemployment and Social Security, and the checks just get delayed because anything that takes, you know, human resources to process is what's going to get slowed down here.
I mean, you're talking 4.4 million people who work for the government that are all affected by this.
Yeah.
So it has a big trickle-down effect.
Big deal, especially in North Florida here, you know, with a lot of government employees. We would definitely see some kind of an impact, and even though they would eventually get the money, just getting late puts people in a bad position. You start paying late fees on things, and it takes a little while to recover.
Especially in our economy now. Let's talk about taxes. We know the deadline's up a little bit just because of a government holiday.
Right.
On Monday the 18th, they're due. They still want us to file, but our refund might be a little late.
Yeah, your best bet there is to try to file electronically. If you send paper in, again, that takes people to process the paper, and if the government shut down, they're not going to process the paper. However, if the computers are doing all the work, you'll get your money in good order.
Okay. Let's talk about these two sides. They're far apart, and there's also some issues as far as funding NPR and Planned Parenthood, but you talk about those numbers, and it's a very small percentage of the total budget.
Yeah, when you get away from, you know, the 40 billion or 60 billion or whatever it is that they're apart right now, it gets down to political posturing, you know, and they're starting to look at the elections looming next year and seeing what, you know, really hits home with voters and things like that. So you could almost call this preseason for the presidential and congressional elections next fall. And some of those numbers, you know, they're haggling over what equates to less than 2% of the total budget. That tells you right there that this is more politics than budget and financial.
We have a graphic that we can put up to kind of show what the deficit is and where the budget stands.
Yeah, you know, if you look at it, you know, they spend about 3.8 trillion a year, and they're bringing in 2.5 trillion in taxes. So that's a 1.2 trillion deficit. Average household would be going bankrupt in the U.S. if we were running our business that way. Fortunately for the federal government, they have the money printing machine, and they can crank out some dollars to cover the difference. The problem is we do eventually have to pay that money back.
Right. And when we look at both sides, no one's offering or getting rid of the deficit, really. They're just reducing it.
Yeah, and you know, it seems that the Republicans are taking that as a mandate. You know, the rise of the Tea Party has really pushed that forward, and it looks like that could be one of the main points in the campaigns next year. Paul Ryan has put forth a budget that, you know, starts to chip away at it over a few years, but in order to do that, you have to cut somewhere, and that means inflicting pain on your voters, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, you'll have to see how that pans out politically.
Certainly.
Let's kind of compare this to our own household. It's kind of like taking out credit and never paying it back.
Right, yeah, and you know, if we've said it before, if the American household was run the way the federal government is, it would be a problem. The good news is that even though our total accumulated debt is $14 trillion in the U.S., the value of all of our assets added up is $377 trillion. So
that's good.
You know,
but that interest payment is the one that could fluctuate depending on rates.
and you know, that interest payment is adjustable. So it'd be the equivalent of you or I having an adjustable rate mortgage. And if interest rates start going up, which most people feel they will over the next 5 years, that $400 billion in interest payments doubles, triples, and it becomes a pretty significant drag on the U.S. economy.
Scary territory we're in right now, but we will see midnight tomorrow what happens if they can strike a deal. Joe, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thanks.